My husband tried to replace me with his mistress in the company we built together, so I legally seized 63% of his entire real estate empire. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's the architectural blueprint for how I dismantled a toxic real estate empire from the inside out, using a secret clause he never knew existed. By the end of this video, you will have a 3-step framework to protect yourself before someone tries to take over your real estate empire, whatever that may be in your life. If you believe in reclaiming your power, type "I'm ready" in the comments right now to signal the start of your own journey. The air in the Apex Towers Sky Lounge was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, leather, and the crisp, clean smell of new construction that I knew so intimately. Champagne flutes chimed like delicate bells, a sound that was supposed to mean celebration, but felt like a funeral dirge to my ears. From the 80th floor, the lights of Manhattan glittered below us. A diamond carpet rolled out to celebrate Julian's, our greatest achievement. My husband, Julian Croft, stood at the center of it all, a king in his custom-tailored suit. His smile, the one that had once made my heart race, now looked like a carefully practiced mask. And next to him, bathed in the glow of the room's approval, was Serena Vance, 24 years old, with the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having had a door slammed in your face. She was wearing a silk dress the color of money, her hand resting on Julian's arm with a casual ownership that made my blood run cold. I watched them from the edge of the room, a ghost at my own feast. No one looked at me. To them, I was just Evelyn Croft, the supportive wife, the quiet partner. They had no idea that the weight-bearing steel columns hidden behind the polished marble walls were engineered based on my thesis from MIT. They didn't know that the triple-paned, soundproof glass protecting them from the city's roar was a specification I fought for, a detail I knew would elevate the property from luxury to legend. I had poured 10 years of my life, my talent, and the formidable weight of my family's name, Blackwood, into building this man and his company. I had chosen to be the silent architect of his success. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in a room you helped build, leave a dot in the comments so I know I'm not alone. My sister, Clara, caught my eye from across the room, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. She gave a slight shake of her head, a silent warning, but I was frozen. My gaze fixed on Julian as he leaned down to whisper something in Serena's ear. She laughed, a bright, careless sound that echoed in the cavernous space. Then, I saw him do it. He pointed to the sweeping, curved ceiling, a marvel of engineering I had sketched on a cocktail napkin during our first anniversary dinner. That was all Serena's vision, I heard him say to a potential investor, his voice booming with pride. She has this incredible ability to see what no one else can. The lie was so bald, so audacious. It felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just that he was with another woman. It was that he was giving her my work, my mind, my soul. He was erasing me, one blueprint at a time. In that moment, the champagne in my hand tasted like ash. My heart wasn't breaking. It was hardening, crystallizing into something cold, sharp, and purposeful. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten that the Blackwood family doesn't just build skyscrapers. We build fortresses. And every fortress has a failsafe. He used to tell me we were a team, that his success was my success. But as I stood there, invisible in a room full of people celebrating my work, I had to ask myself, when did our partnership become my prison? It didn't become a prison overnight. It was a slow, quiet construction, built with loving hands, mostly mine. When I first met Julian, I wasn't an heiress looking for a handsome escort. I was an architect looking for a voice. The Blackwood name was a skyscraper in itself, casting a shadow so long I feared I'd never build anything in the sun. My father, a titan of New York real estate, didn't raise a princess. He raised a successor. My childhood lullabies were the rumble of concrete mixers. My bedtime stories were zoning laws and structural integrity reports. He taught me that a building is only as strong as its foundation, and a deal is only as good as the escape clause written into its contract. I had the knowledge, the capital, the legacy, but I was quiet, an introvert who preferred blueprints to boardrooms. Julian was the opposite. He was pure charisma, a supernova of ambition and charm. He could sell a penthouse view from a basement apartment. When we met at an industry conference, he didn't see Evelyn Blackwood, the heiress. He saw a mind that could complement his vision. He had the dazzling facade. I had the steel framework. We fell in love planning our empire on the back of restaurant napkins, sketching out a future where he would be the king and I, the hidden, powerful queen. I chose to put his name on the door, Croft Properties. It felt freeing, like I could finally build without the weight of my father's legacy on every brick. I would be the silent partner, the architect behind the curtain. It was my choice, my sacrifice. Our first major project was the Meridian Lofts, a block of abandoned warehouses in a neighborhood everyone else had written off. I spent 6 months in the city archives, digging through deeds and planning documents, discovering a forgotten zoning variance that made the land a gold mine. I drafted the conversion plans myself, preserving the historic brickwork while designing interiors that were a masterclass in light and space. I secured the initial seed money through one of my family's smaller, anonymous trusts. It was my find, my design, my funding. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a reporter from the Times asked Julian what inspired the project. He smiled that dazzling smile and said, "I have a knack for seeing potential where others see decay." He winked at me from the podium. It was supposed to be our secret, but it felt like the first brick in the wall he was building around me. Have you ever been underestimated because of your background? Or had your success attributed to someone else? Let me know with a yes or no in the comments. The system was built to see him, not me. At a Christmas party, my own uncle, a man who had watched me grow up reading blueprints at the dinner table, clapped Julian on the back. "Julian, my boy," he boomed. "You're the son your father-in-law always wanted. You've got the vision." Julian just soaked it in, accepting the praise as his due. He didn't correct him. He never did. Each time, it was a small death, another piece of me chipped away. The price of his fame was my silence. The foundation of his empire was my invisibility. If I stayed on that path, I wouldn't just be erased from the company's history. I'd be a ghost in my own life, haunting the halls of the world I had built. For years, I told myself the work was what mattered, not the credit, but a foundation, no matter how strong, can only bear so much weight before it begins to show cracks. And I was cracking. The cracks started small, hairline fractures in the foundation of our life that you could only see if you knew where to look. For every gala Julian attended, accepting an award for a building I designed, I was in our home office until 3 a.m., surrounded by blueprints and lukewarm coffee, running seismic stress models until my eyes burned. For every glowing magazine profile that called him a visionary, I was the one on brutal conference calls with contractors, renegotiating supply chain logistics to keep the projects from imploding. I managed the money, the legal, the structural, the entire invisible skeleton that held his glorious public body upright. He's the sun, I used to tell myself, staring out at the city lights from our penthouse. I'm the gravity that keeps his planet in orbit. One can't exist without the other, but gravity is a thankless, unseen force. And I was getting tired of the dark. The first time I lost a piece of myself that I knew I could never get back was when Architectural Digest called. They wanted to do a feature on the mind behind the Meridian Lofts. They were fascinated by the blend of historic preservation and modern minimalism. It was my signature style, a direct reflection of the lessons my father taught me. Julian took the call. I heard him laughing, charming the editor through the phone. I'd be delighted, he said. The design process was a deeply personal journey. When the article came out, he was on the cover, leaning against a reclaimed wood beam I had sourced myself. My name was mentioned once in the final paragraph, a footnote under special thanks. I found the magazine on our coffee table, and the glossy paper felt as heavy as a tombstone. But the biggest sacrifice wasn't just my time or my credit. It was my legacy. 5 years ago, we were trying to acquire the land for what would become the Apex Tower. It was the deal of a lifetime, but the owners, an old New York family like my own, despised Julian's new money swagger. They were days from walking away. The empire would have stalled, maybe even crumbled. So, I stepped in. I called the family patriarch, a man who had played poker with my grandfather. I used my name, Blackwood. He agreed to the deal, but only if the Blackwood Trust provided the foundational capital. My family's money has rules. It's not just ink on a page, it's a covenant. I personally drafted the 100-page investment contract, and deep inside the dense, impenetrable boilerplate, I embedded the clauses my father had taught me to write. He called them the iron veins. They were dormant, complex ownership clauses that tied the controlling interest of any resulting asset directly to the source of the primary capital, my trust, if the managing partner, Julian, ever acted in demonstrable bad faith or moved to dilute the foundational partner's influence without consent. To any other lawyer, it looked like standard, albeit dense, protective language. Julian, who famously said, "I don't do the fine print," signed it without a second glance. It was my secret safety net, the ultimate protection for my family's legacy. I never imagined it would be the weapon I'd need to protect myself from him. With the deal secured, Julian's ego inflated. My voice in meetings grew smaller. I'd present a financial projection, and he'd cut me off with a condescending smile. "Honey, let's leave the numbers to the finance bros, shall we?" he'd say. Even though my projections had saved us from 2 bad deals the year before, he started calling my designs safe in front of junior architects. "Evelyn has a wonderful classical eye," he'd announce. "But I'm the one who provides the disruption, the vision." Each comment was a paper cut, and I was bleeding out so slowly. I barely noticed I was dying. I kept telling myself it was for the empire, our empire. But the word "our" started to taste like a lie. It was his face on the magazines, his name on the awards, his voice in the interviews. My contributions were being laundered through his charisma, and all I was left with was the bone-deep exhaustion of being the ghost in my own machine. I was running on fumes, my spirit worn down to a thread. I thought it would take a monumental, public betrayal to finally make me walk away. The universe, it seems, was listening, and it was already sending out the invitations. The invitations called it an intimate dinner for the future of Croft Properties. It was held 2 weeks after the Apex Tower Gala, in a private room at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a single, unmarked mahogany door. There were 20 people, the board, the top VPs, and our most crucial investors. It was the inner sanctum, the room where the real decisions were made, and I was there, of course, playing my now familiar role as the elegant, silent wife. The air was different here than at the gala. It was quieter, heavier, thick with the scent of old money and the unspoken pressure of billion-dollar deals. Every glance, every word, was measured. Serena was there too. This time, she wasn't a guest. She was seated at the long, polished table between Julian and our chief operating officer. Her presence wasn't a secret to be whispered about. It was a statement of fact, a declaration. I could feel the gazes of the other wives, the women I'd served on charity boards with for a decade. They slid over me with a morbid curiosity, their eyes filled with a terrible, knowing pity. They were watching a car crash in slow motion, and they couldn't look away. I kept my spine straight, my expression placid, a perfect marble statue of the supportive spouse. Inside, my stomach was a knot of dread. The dinner was a blur of exquisitely prepared food I couldn't taste and wine that felt like acid on my tongue. Then, Julian stood, tapping his crystal glass with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. Friends, partners, he began, his voice smooth and confident. We are here tonight not just to celebrate our past successes, but to toast to the future. A future that requires bold risks, new energy, and a vision that isn't afraid to disrupt the very foundations of our industry. He smiled. That brilliant, predatory smile. The past is our bedrock, and we honor it. But you cannot build a skyscraper for tomorrow using the blueprints of yesterday. The world is changing, and so are we. It requires a new kind of architect, a new kind of visionary. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew what was coming. I felt it in the sudden chill of the air, in the way every person at the table was now studiously avoiding my gaze. He turned his body slightly, a subtle shift that put Serena directly in his spotlight. I have found that new vision, he declared, his voice ringing with performative passion. I have found that fearless, disruptive energy, and I found it in Serena Vance, which is why, tonight, I am profoundly honored to announce her as the new Chief Design Officer for Croft Properties, effective immediately. She will be the guiding hand, the visionary force, behind every project we build from this day forward. He raised his glass. To Serena. The room was utterly silent for 3 agonizing seconds. It was a silence so complete I could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the corner. Then, a smattering of confused, obligatory applause broke the spell. The board members, loyal to the money, clapped. The investors, loyal to Julian, clapped. The wives, loyal to the social order, clapped. They were all applauding my public execution. He hadn't just replaced me in his life. He had formalized it. He had stripped me of my title, my purpose, my work, the very last piece of myself that I thought was mine, and handed it to the 24-year-old sleeping in his bed. Serena stood up, a vision of blushing, triumphant humility. "Thank you, Julian," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry. "I am so honored. I know I have big shoes to fill." Her eyes flickered towards me for a nanosecond, a glint of pure, unadulterated victory. "But I have been working very closely with Julian for some time now, and I'm confident that my perspective will bring a fresh and profitable new direction for us all." The double entendre hung in the air, thick and suffocating. This was her coronation. This was my deposition. From across the table, my sister Clara's eyes were burning holes into the side of Julian's head. I could see her hand clenching her napkin, ready to fly across the table. But I was somewhere else entirely. I was floating above my own body, watching this woman, this stranger, calmly narrate the theft of her own life. The room was spinning, a vortex of whispers and pitying glances. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to scream, to shatter a wine glass, to give them the drama they were all feasting on. I thought I would completely fall to pieces, that the woman who was Evelyn Croft would simply cease to exist in that moment. But what I didn't realize was that at that very moment, as the last of her was burning away, someone else was being forged in the fire, and she was already planning her war. I didn't go home that night. The woman who lived in that cold, glass penthouse overlooking the park had died somewhere between the main course and dessert. I walked out of that restaurant, my heels clicking on the cold pavement, a soldier walking away from her own smoldering life. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The fog of a decade-long compromise had burned away, and for the first time, I saw the battlefield exactly as it was. I got into a cab, but I didn't give my home address. I gave the address to our headquarters. Julian thought he had fired me. He just gave me the freedom to finally start my real work. The first step in any war is to gather your intelligence. I spent the next 72 hours in a state of controlled, cold fury, executing a 3-part strategy. Step 1. Document the truth. Julian was arrogant. He assumed I was at home, shattered, crying into a pillow. He would never imagine I'd be in his office at 2 a.m., the faint scent of Serena's perfume still hanging in the air, methodically building my arsenal of truth. My keycard still worked. An oversight. His first of many. For 12 hours straight, fueled by nothing but black coffee and a righteous anger. I downloaded a decade of my life onto a series of encrypted hard drives. Every original blueprint with my digital signature and time-stamped metadata. Every preliminary financial model that I had built, which he had later presented as his own. Every email chain where I had proposed a strategy, only to have him shoot it down and then reintroduce it a week later to the board. I found the catering receipts from his business lunches with Serena, the private jet manifests for their site visits. I documented it all, creating an unshakable, chronological fortress of facts that proved one simple thing. I wasn't just the woman behind the man. I was the entire foundation. And he was just the expensive, empty penthouse sitting on top. Step 2. Activate the leverage. The next morning, I walked into my sister Clara's law office. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. I laid the hard drives on her polished conference table. "I need you to find the kill switch," I said. Clara, a shark in a designer suit, got a dangerous glint in her eye. We spent the day poring over the investment contract for the Apex Tower, the one I had written, the one Julian had never read. She scrolled through the dense legalese until she landed on Article 12, Section 4, the Blackwood Legacy Clauses. "My God, Evie," she whispered, her voice filled with a lawyer's reverence. This is a work of art. It's a legal masterpiece." She pointed to the key phrase, "In the event of demonstrable bad faith by the managing partner, including actions that intentionally dilute or professionally disenfranchise the foundational capital partner." She looked up at me, her face alight. "He didn't just give you grounds, Evelyn. He handed you a loaded gun, publicly firing you, the foundational partner, and replacing you with his mistress is the very definition of demonstrable bad faith. According to this, you have the right to call an emergency vote to reassign the controlling interest to protect the primary investment. The weapon wasn't just a safety net. It was a guillotine. Step 3. Secure the exit. Vengeance is a fire that can consume you if you're not careful. I wasn't just planning to burn his empire down. I was planning to build my own from the ashes. While Clara prepared the legal motions, I made my own moves. I met with my family's wealth manager and created a new, independent corporate entity. I quietly began liquidating joint assets that I was legally entitled to, moving the capital into accounts that Julian couldn't touch. I was building my lifeboat, ensuring that when I lit the match, I wouldn't be caught in the explosion. This was no longer about saving our marriage or our company. This was about a clean extraction of my life, my work, and my capital from his toxic orbit. My strategy was a 3-pronged attack: document the truth, activate my legal leverage, and secure my own exit. Which step would you have started with? Let me know in the comments. 1, 2, or 3. By the end of the week, everything was in place. The evidence was cataloged, the weapon was sharpened, and my lifeboat was stocked and ready to sail. Julian had been so busy celebrating his victory, he hadn't even noticed the seismic charges being planted beneath his throne. He thought he had won a battle at a dinner party. He had no idea I was about to win the war in the boardroom. All I had to do now was make one phone call and say 5 simple words: call an emergency board meeting. The emergency board meeting was convened on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. I chose the main boardroom on the 79th floor of the Apex Tower, a cold, sterile space surrounded on 3 sides by glass, with the city I had helped conquer sprawling below. I wanted him to be surrounded by the evidence of my work as his world came crashing down. Julian was at the head of the long marble table, looking irritated but confident. He thought this was a tantrum, a final, desperate plea from a scorned wife that he would have to manage before getting on with his day. Serena was seated 2 chairs down from him, a pen and a leather-bound notebook in front of her as if she belonged there, her presence a final, arrogant insult. The other 12 board members, all men I had known for years, men who had eaten at my dinner table, looked impatient, glancing at their watches. My sister Clara sat to my right, a silent, formidable presence, her files arranged with lethal precision. "All right," Julian began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's make this quick. My wife has invoked a highly unusual clause to call this meeting. I assume you have some grievances you wish to air publicly. Evelyn, the floor is yours." I didn't look at him. I looked at the board. I stood, my hands resting calmly on the back of my chair. "Good morning, everyone. This meeting is not about personal grievances. It is about a material breach of fiduciary duty and contract by the managing partner, Julian Croft, as outlined in the foundational investment agreement for this very building." A murmur went through the room. Julian's smirk tightened. "As per the agenda distributed by my counsel this morning," I continued, "I will now present evidence of this breach." With a nod to Clara, the 40-foot screen behind Julian's head flickered to life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. First, the blueprints for the Apex Tower appeared. On the left, my original time-stamped CAD files from 5 years ago, bearing my digital signature, E. Blackwood. On the right, the final construction blueprints credited to the Croft Properties internal design team, dated 2 years later. They were virtually identical. I let the image hang in the silence for a full 10 seconds. Next, a series of emails. My emails to our engineers, outlining the specific alloy composition for the weight-bearing columns. Then, Julian's emails to the board a month later, forwarding my technical specs as his own research. Then came the financial models. My intricate, multi-layered projections for the Meridian lofts, the ones that had secured our second round of funding. Next to them, the simplified, slick PowerPoint deck Julian had used to present my work, with his name on every slide. The room was silent now. The board members were no longer looking at their watches. They were leaning forward, their eyes wide, flicking from the screen to Julian's now ashen face, and then to me, a woman they were realizing they had never really seen before. Finally, Clara projected a simple, brutal timeline. Date of the dinner where I was publicly fired. Date of Serena's appointment as chief design officer. And finally, the company expense reports, detailing over $200,000 in private jets, hotel suites, and lavish dinners for Julian and Ms. Vance, all billed as corporate development. I had laid the truth bare. Not with hysterics, but with cold, hard, undeniable data. Julian shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is a violation! These are private company documents! You have no right!" Clara stood slowly, her voice cutting through his anger like a surgeon's scalpel. "On the contrary, Mr. Croft, as the representative of the foundational capital partner, Ms. Blackwood has every right. And your actions," she said, gesturing to the screen, "constitute a textbook case of demonstrable bad faith. The primary trigger condition in Article 12, Section 4 of the contract you signed." She distributed a single-page summary to each board member. "The Blackwood Legacy Clause is explicit. Upon a finding of bad faith, the foundational partner has the immediate right to call a vote to reassign the controlling interest of the associated assets, an interest calculated at 63%, based on the initial capital and its compounded growth, to ensure the integrity and stability of the investment." "This is insane! You can't just steal my company!" Julian roared, his composure finally shattering. I met his gaze for the first time, my voice even and cold. "It was never your company, Julian. It was our company, and you broke the contract that held it together. This isn't theft. This is enforcement." Serena, suddenly finding her voice, stammered, "He built this. Everyone knows that." I didn't even honor her with a glance. "You are not a party to this agreement. You are not a shareholder. You are a paid employee, and you have no voice in this room." Clara addressed the chairman. "Mr. Henderson, the contract is ironclad. The evidence is irrefutable. We call the vote." It was over. The board members, faced with a legal and financial imperative that superseded any personal loyalty to Julian, saw only one path. Their duty was to the money, and the money was now legally bound to me. One by one, their hands went up. First the chairman, then the others, a forest of hands sealing Julian's fate. The chairman cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "The vote is unanimous. The motion carries. The board recognizes Evelyn Blackwood as the new majority shareholder and controlling partner of the assets outlined in the agreement. Power hadn't just shifted, it had been recalled to its source. I stood, gathering my papers. I looked at the two of them, a deposed king and his temporary queen, their faces a mask of disbelief. "Julian, Serena," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Please have your personal effects cleared out of the building by 5 o'clock. Security will be happy to assist you." I didn't feel the hot rush of victory I had expected. I felt the quiet, solid, satisfying click of a world settling back into its rightful alignment. The architect was finally in charge of the house she had built. Walking out of that boardroom was like stepping into a different atmosphere. The air itself seemed clearer, easier to breathe. The board members, who had walked in seeing me as Julian's wife, now parted ways for me, their expressions a mixture of shock, newfound respect, and a healthy dose of fear. They saw the Blackwood in me now, not the Croft. In the silent elevator ride down with Clara, I didn't speak. I simply leaned my head against the cool glass and watched the city skyline ascend past me. When the doors opened to the ground floor, I took a single, deep, shuddering breath. It was the first breath of my own life. The next 48 hours were an exercise in swift, decisive action. A clean, surgical extraction of a decade-long tumor. My first directive, sent from my phone before I even left the building, was to IT, HR, and security. All access for Julian Croft and Serena Vance was to be terminated immediately. By the time I returned to the 79th floor, 2 armed guards stood impassively outside the CEO office. The nameplate on the door, Julian Croft, had already been removed, leaving a faint, blank rectangle on the mahogany. The office was now a neutral space, waiting for its rightful owner. I had the locks changed. When I finally walked in alone, the first thing I did was stride to the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows and with a flick of a switch, raised all the electronic blinds. Sunlight flooded the room, chasing the shadows from the corners. I sat in his chair, my chair, and felt the solid weight of it beneath me. This wasn't a throne I had stolen. It was a seat I had built, and I was finally claiming it. That evening, I went back to the penthouse, our home. It felt like walking onto a perfectly preserved movie set where the film had abruptly ended. The air was still and silent, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 compromises. I walked through the cavernous, minimalist rooms that Julian had decorated, filled with abstract art he'd bought at auctions and furniture that was more beautiful than it was comfortable. None of it felt like me. I didn't pack boxes. I took one small suitcase into it. I placed my father's favorite drafting pencil, a collection of worn architecture books, a photograph of my sister and me as children, and the clothes I had brought with me into the marriage. I left behind the designer gowns, the diamond earrings, the entire wardrobe of the woman I was supposed to be. On the cold marble island in the kitchen, I found the cocktail napkin from our first anniversary, the one with my original, joyful sketch of a curved ceiling. I looked at it for a long moment, the faded ink a testament to a dream that had turned into a blueprint for my own cage. I left it there, a final, silent artifact of a dead civilization. The divorce proceedings began a week later. Julian and his lawyer met us at Clara's office. He walked in with his old swagger, a desperate attempt to reclaim the power he'd lost. He thought he could bully me, that this was still a personal fight he could win with intimidation. He was wrong. Before he could even speak, I laid out the new terms of our existence. I looked directly at him, my voice calm and devoid of the emotion he expected. First, from this moment forward, all communication between us will be conducted exclusively through our legal counsel. You will not call me, text me, or approach me or any member of my family. This is a professional boundary. It is not negotiable. Second, I am prepared to honor our prenuptial agreement regarding all personal assets acquired outside of the Blackwood Trust and its derivatives. I want a swift and clean resolution. This fairness is conditional upon your full and immediate cooperation. Third, I said, leaning forward slightly, letting my words land with the full weight of their meaning. Any attempt to contest the board's decision, publicly disparage me or the company, or delay these proceedings in any way will be met with the full force of my legal and financial power. I will consider it a hostile act, and I will respond in kind. This is not a negotiation. Julian, this is the new reality. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The anger and bluster he had walked in with had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He was no longer dealing with his wife. He was dealing with the majority shareholder of a real estate empire, and he had absolutely no leverage. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. He was just a man in an expensive suit, sitting across a table from the woman who had just taken his entire world. Leaving that meeting, I didn't feel triumphant, only lighter. The final chains had been cut. The following weeks were about rebuilding, not on the ruins of my old life, but on a fresh plot of land. I moved out of the city and bought a historic brownstone in Brooklyn, one with good bones that had been neglected for years. I spent my weekends there, covered in dust, sketching plans for its restoration. I was literally and figuratively rebuilding my own home, on my own terms. My first major test as CEO came in the form of the Silver Creek development, a sprawling mixed-use project that Julian had nearly driven into the ground. He had sold the investors on a flashy, impossible design, promising ridiculous returns and ignoring the glaring engineering challenges. The project was now a mess of broken contracts and looming lawsuits. The primary investor, a notoriously ruthless hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, was threatening to pull his $100 million stake, which would kill the project and send a shockwave of no confidence through my new leadership. I didn't call a flashy press conference. I put on a hard hat and spent a week at the construction site. I talked to the foremen, the welders, the electricians. I unrolled my original feasibility studies, the ones Julian had ignored, and compared them to the current disaster. The problem was obvious. Julian had insisted on a glass atrium that was aesthetically stunning, but structurally unsound without a budget-breaking support system. I called a meeting with Thorne and his team. There was no fancy lunch, just the blueprints spread across a table in a dusty trailer on the site. "Mr. Thorne," I said, pointing to a section of the plan. "The problem isn't the vision, it's the vanity. This atrium is the reason for your cost overruns and your structural delays. It's an architectural folly." I then rolled out my revised plan. It was simpler, stronger, and more elegant. It replaced the atrium with a load-bearing steel and glass entryway that was just as beautiful but integrated into the building's core design. My plan brings the project back on budget, finishes it 6 months ahead of Julian's schedule, and increases the net rentable square footage by 4%. It's less vanity, more value. Thorne, a man who lived and breathed numbers, studied my revisions for a full 5 minutes. He traced the new lines with his finger. He looked at my budget breakdown. Finally, he looked up at me, his skeptical gaze replaced by one of pure, unadulterated respect. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is the first time this project has made any goddamn sense. We're back in." That was my micro win. It wasn't a headline or an award. It was a quiet, decisive victory earned not with charm or connections, but with competence. It was proof that my power wasn't an accident of a legal clause. It was the result of my skill. As I walked away from the site that day, the late afternoon sun warming my face, I felt a deep, unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in over a decade, the silence in my own head didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like possibility. The quiet, expansive peace that comes not from winning a war, but from finally standing on a foundation you know, without a doubt, will never, ever crack. So that's how it happened. That's how I went from being the silent architect of my husband's empire to the CEO of my own. I didn't just win a legal battle. I reclaimed a life that I had willingly and foolishly given away. My story is unique in its details, the billions of dollars, the glass skyscrapers, the arcane legal clauses, but I know that the heart of my story is not unique at all. It's the story of countless women who have poured their brilliance into a partnership, a family, or a company, only to find their contributions erased and their voice silenced. The pain of that experience was immense, but the lessons it taught me are priceless. And I want to share them with you, not as abstract ideas, but as a concrete framework for reclaiming your own narrative. I learned everything through 3 stages: awareness, tools, and action. First, awareness. You must name your own contribution. For years, I operated under the dangerous assumption that my hard work would speak for itself. It won't. Silence is not humility. It is an invitation to be ignored. I was the structural engineer, the financial strategist, and the design visionary. But because I never claimed those titles, the world was happy to give them to the charismatic man standing next to me. Your value does not exist in a vacuum. You have to be the one to give it a name, to attach it to your identity, and to state it calmly and consistently as a fact. Second, tools. You must build your own fortress. My father taught me to weave legal fortresses into contracts. That was my tool. Yours will be different. It could be a getaway fund that you contribute to every month, a separate bank account that no one else can touch. It could be a meticulous record of your accomplishments at work, saved to a personal device. It could be a powerful network of mentors and allies who see you and will advocate for you. Do not pour all of your resources into building someone else's dream without simultaneously building your own defenses. A fortress isn't a sign of mistrust. It's a foundation for your own independence. And third, action. You must define your boundaries. This was the hardest lesson. Power is not given. It is claimed by clearly defining what you will and will not accept. When I sat across from Julian and laid out my terms, how we would communicate, the conditions for the settlement, and the consequences for crossing the line, I wasn't being emotional. I was being the CEO of my own life. A boundary is not a wall. It's a clear set of instructions for how the world is permitted to treat you. I know how overwhelming it can feel. So I've distilled this into a simple 90-second framework. Let's call it the 3-step self-rescue plan. Step 1, the audit. For the next 7 days, I want you to keep a private log of your value. Every time you solve a problem at work, write it down. Every time you come up with a brilliant idea. Save the email. Every time you make a sacrifice for your family or partnership. Note it. This isn't about keeping score. It's about creating an undeniable, private record of your own worth, for your eyes only. Step 2. The anchor. Identify one single thing in your life that is yours and yours alone. It could be a skill, a savings account, or a cherished friendship. This is your anchor in a storm. Your mission for the next month is to strengthen it. Take an online course to improve that skill, set up an automatic transfer to that savings account, or schedule a dinner with that friend. Make your anchor unshakable. Step 3. The assertion. This week, practice one small, low-stakes boundary. It could be as simple as saying, "I can't stay late tonight," without giving a long excuse, or saying in a meeting. I'd like to take a moment to elaborate on that idea as it originated in my report. You are building the muscle of self-advocacy. Start with a small weight. This journey is not easy, and you don't have to do it alone. I've created a downloadable checklist of this 3-step plan for you. The link is in the description below. And I want to build a community right here, in the comments. Tell us which step you're going to start with. Let's hold each other accountable. The world is filled with silent architects, women who build families, careers, and communities, only to watch someone else cut the ribbon. But we are not invisible to each other. By naming our work, by building our own anchors, and by sharing our stories, we're not just taking back a seat at the table. We're designing a whole new kind of building, one with a foundation of mutual respect and 1,000 windows for the light to get in. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe for what's next. Share it with a sister, a friend, a coworker, anyone who needs to be reminded of the power they hold. My name is Evelyn Blackwood, and my work is just beginning.